Hurricane season? So far, not a very good forecast. Why? We'll talk about this and more in the Florida edition of the Water Resources Outlook. So here's a look at the past rainfall, and just so you know, I'm going solo again today like I did last time. We've had a lot of people on trips and so forth, and so you're going to get me again today, so hopefully we can get through this pretty quickly. And what you can see here is the last 2 weeks of rainfall. Now this is a percent of normal. Across central Florida, South Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida, we've been much above normal. Also across South Carolina. Areas where we've been below normal, North Carolina, Virginia, South Florida, and then in northern Alabama and Mississippi. As we look back, and this is just for the last 2 weeks, but as we look back over the last 2 months, you can see that most of the southeast has been covered by above normal rainfall. And even if they've had below normal rainfall, you don't see any reds in there. You don't see anything with 12 and 16 inches below normal, kind of like what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years during this time of year. And so we are looking at plenty of water across the southeast, and in some cases a little bit too much. We've been fortunate during this time to not have severe flooding in a lot of places. We have had some pretty significant flooding, especially down in South Georgia and along the coast of South Carolina and so forth, and there have been some impacts there, but based on the rain that we've had, we really haven't had huge impacts in those areas, and that's good news. So now that we've looked at the last 14 and the last 60 days of rainfall, we're going to look back to the beginning of the year. And we're going to take Tallahassee as our example. It's in the Panhandle, and above we have selected cities, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But when you look at this graph, the explanation is the dark black line is the average. That's what we would expect during this time, average for all these other lines. This is historical data over the last anywhere between 60 and 80, 85 or 90 years. I mean, it just all depends. You'll see above that we have, actually Fort Myers has 102 years, but it varies. But this is showing all those years. The brown lines show the driest years. The green lines show the wettest years, and the blue line shows our observed data for this year. And one of the things you'll notice about our observed data is that for the first 2 months of the year, it was pretty dry in Tallahassee. And then in late February into early March, we got a lot of rainfall over a short period of time. And then it evened out, and then it started to jump up again. Now, right now, Tallahassee is not in one of their wettest years. They're actually a little bit lower than that. But you look above, and you can see there's a wide variety. Florida has been, we'll look at this as compared to the past, for July and so forth, and the past seasonal, but it's very spotty on where they've been wet and where they've been dry, especially along the East Coast. They've been a little bit drier. You get along the West Coast and in the Panhandle, they've been much wetter, so there's a big variety of rainfall in Florida. And again, we'll talk about that in just a little while. So now let's look at the precipitation rankings for both July and the seasonal May through July. And what you see is that we've had an extremely wet July, and we expected that just based on all the things that I've been talking about. And it's the wettest ever in Florida, and we're at the top in all of the southeast states except for Mississippi, which has not been so high. But in the Carolinas, Virginia, we're seeing much above normal, and this goes for the May through July seasonal rankings, still extremely high. The wettest in South Carolina. Then actually, Mississippi kind of catches up that they're wetter than normal for that time period. So for the whole time period and for the whole summer, we have been very wet. And so that's good news for a lot of the recharge that we needed, and we've been dry for so long, we should be caught up in most of those areas. So why did this happen? Well, one of the things is we look at the composite weather pattern and kind of what was going on during that time. We had high pressure sitting over the west, and we had high pressure over the Atlantic. And between we had a trough, and that trough we continued to get fronts coming through. We also got moisture out of the Gulf, and we stayed a little bit cooler than normal, so we continued to get moisture, and of course we had a feedback loop going through there, so we had a lot of things happening, but having that blocking type pattern sitting there and keeping that moisture coming out of the Gulf and keeping us in an active weather pattern kept us wet during that time. And so that's what we looked at in July. We've taken a little break from that right now, and we'll talk about that in the meteorology just for a moment, but it looks like we might be getting back into that in just a little bit. So what has that done with our stream flows? Well, as you can see, almost over all of the southeast, we're either above normal or much above normal, with still some black, and we're high for this time of year. And so the only places where we're really seeing normal and a couple below normal is in North Carolina and Virginia, where recently we've been a little bit drier. They've had a little bit of a break from the rainfall and haven't seen quite as much. And so the stream flows have kind of come down during that time, which is good news. We've had a little bit of dry weather, which should help all of the southeast recover a little bit until maybe we start seeing some wetness again. So now I'm again going to talk a little bit about the meteorology, and my meteorologists have been busy dealing with all the rain, so I'm going to take care of this. And we're looking now at the next week, and this is the rainfall expected over the next week. And you know, we, like I mentioned before, we've kind of gotten quieted down just a little bit. Hasn't been quite as wet over the last few days, which will give us a break, but it does look like we're going to pick up a little bit, and it does look like we'll have a little bit more rain during that time. More summer type thunderstorms. It doesn't look like it'll be heavy, except maybe over the Virginia and Carolinas area, where they could take a little bit of it. They've actually had a little bit of a break up there. Their rivers are normal, so they could probably handle a little bit more of the rainfall, especially along that Hatteras area, where, you know, which was talked about earlier, and could use some more of that rain. South Florida could also use a little bit of that rain because they've been a little bit dry, as looking at the rainfall down there earlier. And so we're in pretty good shape for that first week, and then even the second week. Now, most of the rain looks like it's going to be early in the second week. It doesn't look like it's going to be late in that second week, but it does look like we continue to stay wet after this period, and we don't get out of that. Just for those of you who are out west, we actually looks like we're going to have a little bit above normal rainfall west, which all of them could use, and then a break in the middle of the country. So kind of that weather pattern is setting up that it looks like we may be wet in that second week also. Again, we'll be watching that. That gets us to the bulk of the hurricane season. That gets us to, you know, the main part of the hurricane season comes right then, and it's September 14th is the middle of that. So we'll be watching that to see if hurricanes start to develop at that time. So one of the reasons that the hurricanes might not develop, the Saharan dust layer has been very active this year. There's been a lot of dust coming off of Africa, and that tends to be an inhibitor. I've been reading some articles and looking at some stuff about that. It really has been inhibiting our hurricane and tropical storm development. We've had a few tropical storms just get started this year in different places, but really nothing has gotten going, and there's been no hurricanes yet this year. Nothing has gotten strong. Nothing's had the opportunity to really develop. And part of the reason is the Saharan dust layer. We talked about that in our last Water Resources Outlook, and really that hasn't changed a whole lot. And as long as that's out there, that's going to impact our hurricane season. And so as in the introduction, I talked about our hurricane season. Well, we really didn't have a very good forecast with warmer temperatures along the Gulf and kind of warmer temperatures in the Atlantic and the Gulf. And then also because we were in neutral conditions, it looked like we would have a normal hurricane season. But there's some things you can't factor in and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And this is probably one of those things that impacted it. As for our 1 month outlook, this is for September, and our above normal rainfall kind of shifts a little bit to the north and more in the Ohio Valley and the Pennsylvania area, but we still have a little bit of that in the mountains and so forth. Part of that is probably still some feedback. We'll continue. We've got lots of water on the ground, lots of water in the area, so that will continue for a while. So it looks like September should be more normal right now. And again, even a normal year, we're supposed to get a tropical system or two, and right now we don't see anything, at least on the early part of the horizon. This is for September, the 3-month outlook for September, October, and November, and the above normal chances kind of shifts to the west a little bit. What the Climate Prediction Center is showing is that things are going to kind of shift, and that for the southeast, it looks like equal chances for above normal, near normal, or below normal rainfall. And so that's what we're looking at right now. think that'll be pretty good, but what that does is it transitions into the December, January, and February time frame. Now, right now, it looks like a neutral conditions for that time, but the CPC, some of the models that they're looking at, they're showing some dryness in the area. Now, whether this is going to happen or not, it's kind of hard to say. We may go into that time being wet, so it will impact the rivers either way. So again, we're going to have to watch that very closely. Even a below normal precipitation during that time, if we've been wet coming up to that point, could cause some flooding during the December, January, and February time frame when we expect recharges, and right now it looks like we're in good shape going into that time. Well, the bottom line for Florida, in the short term, it's a mixed bag of rain amounts. I mean, we've had that so far. It looks like that will continue, at least for now. But it does look like we'll get maybe to a little bit more normal as we go into the peak tropical season. Now, the peak of tropical season, it's still kind of hard to tell whether we're going to be active. It looks like we're going to be less active than we suspected, but we have to be very careful. Again, it's been very wet there, and so any type of storm that comes through that drops a lot of rainfall could potentially cause some problems. So we'll have to watch it very closely, but again, it doesn't look like it's going to be as active. As for the long term, as we go out of the wet season and push to the dry season through October, November timeframe, looks like we'll get to more normal rainfall patterns, more dry days than wet days. Looks like things will start to improve in that area, and then we'll have to see about, like I said, the difference between our dry areas and our wet areas, and whether the East Coast maybe gets a little bit, the East Coast and the south part of Florida get a little bit more rain. Our next water resources outlook will be on September 17th, 2013. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember, you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Also, feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamill@noaa.gov.